study through the book of John because I'm teaching John back there at 12:30, so I'm going to teach some of the same stuff out here. And Bob's not here today, so can't figure out why that slide isn't filling up the whole screen, but I clicked on it back there, slideshow from the beginning, but it's got a different program. So anyways, we're going to go through some of them, but I want you to think about some of the things. So we're going to start this study in John. John's purpose, he tells us I hear the echo, in John 20:31 is that, he says this to you in John 20, chapter 20, verse 31. He says, "But these are written that you may believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, and that by believing you may have life in his name." That's the purpose that John wrote his book. Today I was just having a conversation with Rick. You know, many don't believe that Jesus Christ is the Son of God, but John, in the first 14 verses of John chapter 1, his prologue is he is going to convince you, or that's what he's attempting to do, that Jesus Christ is the Son of God, that he is the Messiah. Jesus later said that there's only one way unto heaven, and that is through me. No one can come unto the Father except you come through me. As a child of God, that's not popular in our Western civilization today. In our Western culture, they don't like to hear that there is only one way unto heaven. The Apostle John says there's only one way. That is through Jesus Christ, who is the Son of God. And so, I know that might not be popular to some people who might even see this video. I know it's not popular when you go out into the world and you tell people, no, you have to believe in Jesus Christ in order to be saved. They will tell you that, you know, he was a good man maybe, or that he was a prophet, or that he's not God. If you don't believe that Jesus Christ is God, you cannot enter heaven. And I'm not ashamed to tell you that. Now, I don't say that to belittle you. I don't say that to make you less. I say that because that's the only hope you have. And that's what John is trying to get across to his reader. He's trying to let them know that you have to properly understand who Jesus Christ is. And so he starts his message. And we'll look at some of those verses. So let's go to God in prayer. Father, I pray that you be with us this morning as we take a few minutes and look at the writings of John as we go through the book. We're going to look at just a few of the first verses, but John went overboard in his masterpiece of trying to show us how God stepped out of the picture frame and came to earth and took on flesh and dwelt among mankind so that man could see what God looked like, so that man could have a relationship with God, so that grace and mercy would be shown like never seen before. So he came and he tabernacled in our backyard. And he spent some 33 years here on earth in order that we could experience him face to face. So, Father, I pray that as we go through this lesson that we'll realize the importance of those things. And we can understand that we can have faith in what we believe because you came to earth and you dwelt among us. And you showed your grace and your truth. Be with us. May your Spirit guide us. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. So in John, these first 14 verses, I don't know if maybe they're not even going to turn. They're not going to turn. So I'm going to use my own slides. I don't know what's going on with it. Oh, there it went. Maybe. You think it's slow, or do you think Jason did it? It's a miracle. So I just read you some of these verses. This is John 1:1-6. We're going to read these 14. Well, Ricky read these. I'll just quickly go over them. But it said, in the beginning was the Word. I want you to know that John did a masterful work here. When he wrote the book, when he used the word, when he said, in the beginning was the Word, you can see that he went all the way back to the beginning. The Jews would know what he was talking about. In the beginning. Where do you think they heard that? Genesis. In the beginning, God created the heavens and earth. And John does a masterful piece here. He takes all his Hebrew writers and he gets them to go all the way back to Genesis, and he says, hey, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word means logos in Greek, your text being written in Greek. And so with that being said, he grabs his Hebrew listeners and he grabs his Gentile listeners, or the Greeks. Because the Greeks were really caught up on the word logos. Because they believed in intelligence. They believed in this outer thinking God, that intelligent divine, design, you might say. They believed there was something that built this thing that we call earth, that just like this podium, there had to be something behind it in order to build this podium. And they believed in order to build the world, there had to be something behind that. So the Greeks are listening because they're like, logos, yeah, we understand logos. And the Jews are listening because, yeah, we know way back in the beginning there was the Word. And so he really does an intelligent thing. He writes this. See, we read this and we say Jesus, Jesus, Jesus as you read down through the passage. But he doesn't mention Jesus until he gets down to verse 14. They don't read that. They see logos. They see this design, this intelligent being, the Gentiles. And the Hebrews are showing, oh yeah, we know about God from the beginning, who created everything. But John does a very interesting thing there. And he says, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Again, you see Jesus. And we'll see that as we get down there. They don't see that. They see, oh, you're saying that this Word is God? Yes, he's God. And then we'll find out who he is. He said he was God in the beginning. Again, very interesting, because now you have Jesus, as you find out about him as you get down a little further, that he says Jesus existed before the foundation of the world. That's why he's God. Nobody made Jesus. If you read Matthew, Mark, and Luke, they start out with the genealogies. Matthew goes all the way back to Abraham and says, well, he was of Abraham's seed. Why? Because he's speaking to Jews. Mark and Luke start with John the Baptist coming on the scene. John says, this Jesus that I'm going to show you existed before the foundation of the world. Now, that's a whole lot of different thinking. He wasn't born. It answers that story about a baby being born in a manger, about little shepherds and gifts. But John wants you to know that was God, fully man and fully human and fully God, fully deity. Now we try to wrap our mind around that, and we say, well, how can there be one God? We're not theists. We don't believe in three gods. We believe in one God. Well, how could God be born God? And so it's mind-boggling. We say it's one God with three persons. Okay, sounds good. But I like what one man said about it. Maybe God's just a little bit bigger than we could really wrap our head around. You're kind of paraphrasing it, but the idea is that the God we serve is a whole lot bigger than we can probably understand. The truth is, though, we know about the Trinity. And anyways, he says, in the beginning, through him all things were made. Nothing was made that he had not made. In him was life, and that life was a light of mankind. I want you to think about that. God came to the world to bring you light and life. And it was the light of mankind. And the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. And there was a man sent from God whose name was John. Now he's switching to John the Baptist. I want you to get, this might be some of the saddest verses in the Bible. He said, the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it, or darkness did not understand it, or the darkness did not accept it. God came to earth as a baby, took on flesh, and the world did not accept him. Isn't that sad? Isn't that sad that we live in a world today that God sent his son to die for them, and they reject him. They want nothing to do with him. A God that came just to offer you grace and mercy. And yet the world rejects him and says we don't want nothing to do with him. Those are some of the saddest verses in the Bible. I don't know what you've done with God. You're here this morning, so I would say most of you probably accepted God. But if you haven't, John's idea is to say that you can know that Jesus came and he dwelt among us. And he dwelt among you because he wants to know you. He wants to understand you. And he wants to have something to do with you. So I don't know, see if I can get this to turn. Hey! So then it said he came as a witness to testify concerning that light. This is John the Baptist. Through him all might believe. He himself was not the light. He came only as a witness to the light, the true light that gives light to everyone who comes into the world. He was in the world, and through the world was made through him. The world did not recognize him. So again, these are the saddest verses. God comes to earth, and he's not recognized. He came to that which was his own, but his own did not receive him. And then it says, yet to all who did receive him, to those who believed in his name, he gave the right to become children of God. Children born not of natural descent, nor of human decision, or of a human will, but born of God. The Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. We have seen his glory, the glory of the one and only Son, who came from the Father, full of grace and truth. So this is what I wanted to talk to you for just a minute. Jesus became human. It said that the Word became flesh. Through him all things were made. This is why when you talk to a lost and dying world who doesn't see Jesus Christ as the Son of God, who doesn't see him as God, does not have the same hope that we have. You can't water down who Jesus is. You can't say he was just a good man. You can't say he was just a prophet. You can't offer another way. You cannot, according to John, do away with the Son of God who came to earth in the flesh. Now, if you look at verses like in Hebrews and other places, he'll say that that's why you have one who goes before you, because he can stand as your adversary, because he was tempted in every way that you were tempted. Later in this verse, he's going to say he came in grace and truth. The greatest problem that the world has today is grace. They don't have that without Jesus Christ. They don't have the forgiveness of sins. Jesus stepped into a world full of sickness and disease, just like people that we have today, full of hurts, brokenness, pain. And he said, come unto me, all ye that labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Jesus came for a broken people and gave himself for a broken people. And he showed you and me how to do that. By stepping out of heaven and coming unto earth, he demonstrated in the body of a person. All of a sudden, the heartbeat was God's heartbeat, and the movements of hands and legs was a movement of God in this person called Jesus Christ, the Messiah. And they saw demonstrated witnesses that walked with him for this period of time that he was on earth, saw what God looked like and how God would act in certain situations. And so when they came to Jesus later and said, well, show us the Father, he said, you've seen the Father if you've seen me. Me and my Father are one. I can do nothing that my Father doesn't ask me to do. This is the point that John is driving home to these people. God left heaven, came to earth to be with his people, so you could see what grace and truth looks like. So you could get a taste of it. When somebody sits and you study with them and they say, well, I just cannot accept this unless I see God. You ever had someone tell you that? I just can't accept this without actually having experienced it, seen it, touched it. The only thing I can say to them is God came. And he walked upon this earth for about 33 years. And the people rejected him. And you might be one of them today. But the truth is, there's nothing else that can be offered. The truth is, God came and dwelt among his people in order that they could see what he looked like in the sense of how he acted, how he conducted himself, and how he would give himself. And John is teaching these things. When he stepped out, Jesus became the visible expression of an invisible God. You now know what God looks like because you know Jesus. And you know how Jesus conducted himself, how he went to the woman in the well. What he told the woman that was brought before him that was going to be stoned. And he said, "Woman, where is thy accusers? I don't accuse you. Get up and go. Sin no more." That Jesus entered the world so you and I would know what God would look like. And you and I know because of our own lives why we need God. We know of our brokenness. We know of our failures. And we know without grace and mercy we wouldn't be who we are. All of us hurt from something in the past. All of us have been touched by something. All of us have been left behind. All of us at one time needed some hope. And God put on flesh to bring you that hope. He came down here and dwelt in the form of a human being so that he could look out at all of us and say, you know what? You need me. You need grace. You need mercy. And he came and demonstrated it. He demonstrated it to every healing that he did. John gives about 8 different healings in his book. 6 of them aren't covered in the other Gospels. He goes to a wedding and turns water into wine because he cares about people. He heals leprosy and the lame and the sick. He goes to all those that are outside the norms. Jesus lived among us. The Word said he became flesh and made his dwelling. That word dwelling is a pitching of a tent. You might know, if you know your Old Testament, you know that God first had a tabernacle built in order of a meeting place for people to meet God. Jesus basically says, I came and tabernacled in your backyard. I came and put my tent in your neighborhood, is what the New Living, if you will read the Message, it's going to say this. It's going to say that Jesus moved into your neighborhood. If I come and camp at your house and put my tent in your backyard, you and me might be eating at your table and I might be using your restroom or coming in your house, right? But if I go move into a neighborhood and I build me a mansion and put up a fence, I'm probably telling people I don't really want you in. Jesus came and pitched a tent in your backyard because he wanted to tabernacle with you. He wanted to know you, understand you. And more importantly, he wants you to come and know him and what kind of God he is with you. And he pitched his tent in your neighborhood. He tabernacled. The Message put it this way: the Word became flesh and blood and moved into the neighborhood. I like that. Jesus became flesh and blood and moved into your neighborhood so you could get a taste and a feeling of what God is. I said for 30 years. Then Jesus revealed, it says, revealed his glory. The Word became flesh, and it talks about the Son of God and full of grace and truth. Jesus is full of grace. We talked about this a little bit, but grace is what we need in this lost and dying world. Grace is, there's too much bitterness. Thanks, Jim. Too much arguing, too much fighting, too much backbiting. We need grace. All of us need grace. There's no perfect people in this room, and there's no perfect people in this world. And Jesus showed up to show what grace really looks like. I don't know if I could drive that point home to you enough. And then truth. God is who he said he is, and God will deliver what he said he will deliver. Jesus lived out what he said he was going to do. He went to a cross and took on sin, being an innocent man, in order that you and me could live. That's grace. It's mercy. It's truth. And John is driving this point home to his readers. This is the Jesus I'm going to tell you about. He takes 14 verses to set his people up to say, read my book because it's the bestseller, because in the end of this, I'm going to tell you what God did for you. He takes 14 verses and says, God stepped out of heaven. Kind of like this story. A soldier's going off to war. And he takes a picture of himself. He gives it to his wife and the little baby. He's off for war, and like 4 years go by, and the mama would show the picture to the child every day saying, well, this is Daddy. And one day the daughter says to the mama, wouldn't it be nice if Daddy could step out of the picture frame? Jesus stepped out of the picture frame so you would know what God looks like and acts like. 2 men at war. Terrible scene. Battles raging. The dead are everywhere. The wounds and the crying and the screaming are loud. They make their way to a safe place. And one of them shouts out, "Where's God in this hell?" And as they look out over the battlefield, they see 2 medics crawling along, picking up soldiers and putting them on a stretcher and carrying them to safety. And the other man says, "We have seen God." We have seen God in the lives of those 2 medics that have crawled along out there in danger to bring people to safety. Today, God expects it from you and me. As Jesus reigns in heaven at the right hand of God, the Spirit lives in you. And you have been granted grace and mercy to show the world what that looks like. And when the world shouts out loud, "Where is God? Where is God in this mess?" they should see him in you and in me by the actions that we live, by the story that John told us, how God stepped out of heaven, took on flesh to demonstrate to you and me in real life what grace and truth looks like. And we as members of the church live that out here on earth when we care about others more than we care about ourselves. Jesus was not invisible or obscured. People knew who he was and what he had done. We aren't to be invisible or obscured. We've taken too long, we've taken a back seat, and we've softened down who Jesus Christ is. Jesus Christ is the Son of God who was in the beginning where nothing was created that he did not create. And while I may not understand all that, I know this. He was not a created being. He always was. And he chose to come to this earth and die for us. When you look at Jesus, you see the face of God. When you hear Jesus speak, you hear God speak. When you experience Jesus, you experience God. Jesus invites us to himself, who came from the Father, full of grace and truth. And so I want you to know. See, I don't know how I want to conclude this. I would conclude it to tell you that God has given every one of you a mission, as he's given, as his Son came and exposed himself. But he's called you to him through grace and truth. What do you do with that? What gift is it that God gave you that you're using for him? How do you see Jesus? Is he of importance in your life? I know he is. You guys are all here. But for someone here who hasn't given their life to God, I want you to know how much he wants you in his family. He wants you so much that he stepped out of heaven and took on flesh and went to the cross. So then he calls you to him through grace and truth and says, "You're worthy. You're fit. I'll take you." No, the world might not look at you that way. God does. And he pleads with you to come have that relationship with him because he tabernacled here. And he wants to tabernacle with you. But don't soft pedal him. Don't play him down as just a good man. Don't play him down as just a prophet or something you do part-time. That's not what God wants from you, nor me. He came and revealed himself so that we would know what it means to live with him. And we would have the offering of forgiveness and sins and all of that. But God loved you so much that he left heaven and he came to earth. That's John's message. And you can know that he wants you. So if you're here this morning and you don't know God, I hope this will somehow open your eyes a little bit to who he is. If you're not coming to the 12:30 class, I hope you'll come. We're going to discuss more of it, and I hope you'll get a glimpse of who God is. I'll leave you one more story. I should have one more closing. It was a good story, so I'll share it with you. There's a lady and a boy. She was 15, he was 17 when they met in high school. Everybody just knew that they would get married. And when they got out of school, sure enough, they got married. And about 4 years into marriage, she's in the kitchen doing dishes. She's got 3 babies at her feet. And she's wondering to herself, how did I get here? This wasn't quite like what I thought marriage was going to be. And she put down the dish towel and she left. She called her husband later that night and said, how are the kids? And he said, well, if you mean that they're fed and in bed, they are. He said, but where are you? And she hung up. And she would call about once a week and ask about how the kids were. And every time he got to, where are you? She would hang up. So finally, months rocked on, and he got some money saved up, and he hired a private investigator, and he found her. So he saved some money. He flew to Des Moines, Iowa, because that's where she was, in a cheap hotel. And as he was going up the stairs, if you were there, you probably could have saw the perspiration on his forehead. His hands were shaking. He wondered what he would find. He knocked on the door, and she answered. And he said, I just want you to know that me and the kids love you. And she fell into his arms. Good story, huh? She fell into his arms. They go home together. Some weeks later, he finally got up the nerve and he said, honey, I just got to know, why wouldn't you come home when I asked you so many times and told you so many times I loved you? And she said, well, those are just words. But when you showed up, when you stepped out of the picture, when you arrived on the scene, I knew you cared. God stepped out of heaven, came to earth to tell you how much he cared. And John tells that story in his book. Now come to the class. Come forward. If we can help you. Come on, Logan.